the final panel of the day is going to talk about really where the rubber meets the road. We're going to focus around implementation and how do we successfully take all of this wonderful discussion and insights that we've developed today and the report that's going to come out of this session, and how do we convert this into action and meaningful action. I think this is probably one of the most important parts of any successful strategy is implementation. And we do a lot of talking around what are the issues and challenges, but we don't do enough focus on how do we translate into action. So that is the focus of this panel. Moderating this panel is our chair, Paul Lucas. I'd like to welcome Paul to the stage.
Well, good afternoon. I think we lost a few people. We need to get them inside here. Probably the best thing to do is close the door, and that'll get them to come in. If those of you outside could come in and we'll get settled. Okay, well, I think we've got a great panel here as our final panel of the day. One of the things I want to do is give you an opportunity to interface with the panel as much as possible. So please think about any questions you have for them. So at the end of the comments, I will open it up for you to ask questions. And if you don't have questions, which I'm sure you will, I'll jump in at that point. So we've covered a lot of territory today, and this is the last panel of the day, and sometimes the energy starts to sink. So we want to try and keep a little energy behind this afternoon. I think one of the things coming out of all the content today, if I boil it all down to one thing, it kind of got my blood flowing and my adrenaline coursing. It was one word: buffalo. So, I was amazed that we spent so much time talking about buffalo and what a great job they've done with their life sciences sector, and are growing it and nurturing it and investing in it and so on. I mean, if Buffalo can do it, why can't Ontario do it? And so I think this is a slam dunk for this province as we look at the need to focus on developing a life sciences strategy for Ontario. We need to do this. If you look at our economy in the province and some of the sectors we focused on in the past, we all know that those aren't the sectors that are going to carry us into the future and create the jobs and the wealth, taxes that we need to create to fund the programs that we so cherish in this province. So clearly we need a strategy. I think we heard that from many of our panelists today. And so when we agree that we need a strategy, then we focus on, okay, how do we convert that into action? How do we implement that? How do we execute that? And I learned something very early on in my career from a very wise consultant, very high-priced consultant. It cost me a lot of money for this one piece of advice. And it wasn't Shift Health, unfortunately for you, unfortunately for me, I guess, but thank you for sponsoring this today. Ryan, much appreciated. But, and it was interesting because Jacqueline alluded to it on the last panel, was if you look at the strategies of organizations, companies that compete with each other, if you look at organizations that are in the same space, look at their annual reports or their websites or whatever, guess what? Their strategies are all the same. That's right. You can put a piece of paper between the strategies of two corporations competing in the same space. Look at the pharmaceutical industry, whatever you want to look at. They're all identical strategies. The difference is really in the execution and whether or not those companies actually execute that strategy successfully. And Jacqueline alluded to that. She's seen a lot of strategies. The ones that are successful are the ones that are good at executions, the ones that have the A-team, the ones that can raise the capital and actually make it happen. So a key part of the whole strategy game. I guess one of the things we heard today too was that the importance of the ecosystem and making sure that the ecosystem works in a collaborative way and in an aligned way. And I think I'd like to explore that a little bit with the panelists later, but this is something we really need to focus on in Ontario. If you look at the province and the various bodies, organizations, companies, government bodies, and so on, there's a lot of them. This is a big province. There's a lot of organizations, all trying to do the same kinds of things, but we're probably not aligned well enough to really make something significant happen. So we need to focus on that, and I think that's come out quite a bit, and the importance of a well collaborating ecosystem. I think one of the other things we heard was that governments won't necessarily lead, and we had some good meetings yesterday in our Queen's Park Day, and we've had previous meetings. We've met with the ministers, and they're looking to us to tell them what we need as a strategy and what support we need from them and how they can facilitate and support a strategy in the life sciences sector. So I think it's incumbent on us to really develop that strategy, developing our thinking around it, make sure that they're engaged in that, and make sure that they know what kind of support we need from them. And that's something that we seem to hear consistently. So we need to think about that one. And my last comment before I turn it over to the panel is really around some of the data out there and the impact that the life sciences sector can have on a jurisdiction. I mean, just think of Boston. I mean, we heard the Boston story. What's the population of Boston? Anybody know? Is it bigger than Toronto?
No.
No, it's not bigger than Toronto. And you look at the fact that they were successful because of density, and quality. I mean, you're talking Ontario. I mean, if Boston can do it, why can't Ontario do it? You look at the impact of corporations in this sector. We like to use the example of Gilead, for example. There's a company that's not that old, hasn't been around that long, has generated thousands of jobs around the world, been extremely successful. The market cap of Gilead is larger than 3 of the top companies on the TSX in Canada, one of them being the Royal Bank of Canada. So that one company is much more valuable than many of our companies combined. And when you take 2 or 3 of those companies, like a Gilead and an Amgen, they're more valuable than the whole mining and minerals sector in Canada. So you look at the huge value add that these companies can create. And so for me, the challenge is, and we've talked about this at LSO, is how do we create a Gilead here in Ontario? And it doesn't have to be in pharmaceuticals. It could be in any of the sectors of life sciences, but it's another Gilead, another BlackBerry, another Nortel, and yeah, people say that those failed, but as you heard earlier today, the long-term impact on the country of those 2 corporations is absolutely dramatic in terms of the talent it's created, the wealth it's created, the spin-offs it's created, and so on. So we don't need to create 25 of these companies. We need 1 or 2 or 3 in the whole life sciences sector. So we need to find a way to make this happen. So that brings me back to execution and implementation. And I wanted to turn it over to our panelists, and I'm going to just introduce them briefly and then ask them to make a few comments for 3 to 5 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions and discussion. But first of all, we have Robin Harkness, who is the Vice President of Research at Ontario Genomics. Chirfi Guindo, who is President and Managing Director at Merck Canada. Giles Gherson, who is the Deputy Minister of Research and Innovation and Economic Development, Employment and Infrastructure.
That's it.
And Bill Charnetski, who is now the Chief Health Innovation Strategy, new in his role. Terrific you could join us today, Bill. And Tom Corr, who is President and CEO of the Ontario Centres of Excellence. So we have a lot of the key organizations, obviously, including government in the life sciences community here. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Robin, and I asked him last night if he really wanted to go first because he's been kind of put on the spot. How many weeks in the job have you been in?
2 weeks.
2 weeks, okay. So you're an expert. Go for it.
So thanks very much for the opportunity. So I'm speaking on behalf of the Ontario Genomics. It used to be the Ontario Genomics Institute. We're the Ontario's Genomics Innovation Enabler. We're a provincial node of the federal granting agency Genome Canada. We're a provincially funded organization, a not-for-profit, whose role is to play a role in the early stage transitioning of genomics technologies in Ontario to take them from the lab to generate solutions to real-world problems. So we support Genome Canada projects, and we drive and catalyze R&D in the genomics space in Ontario. In our enabler role, and through our partnership with Genome Canada, we've brought in significant research money into the province of Ontario. So with Genome Canada, we've brought a total of about $880 million of research funding into the province since our inception. Now this is very nice, but we have a challenge, and the challenge has been brought forward a number of times today, and that is, while we have a formidable supply of research discoveries, these discoveries aren't necessarily being pushed through the translational pathway into products and influential policies. So when you think about it, Canada has less than 0.5% of the world's population, yet we produce 5% of the world's most frequently cited papers, according to the Canadian Council of Academies. Despite that, we receive a failing grade when it comes to innovation, and we're ranked 14th out of 17 peer nations, according to the Conference Board. So to try and influence and change this, Ontario Genomics has adopted a critical pull demand model. And in this model, we work with the businesses, with the receptors, to understand what their challenges are, what their problems are, and we try and work with them to find genomic solutions to their issues. So we work across a number of sectors to do this. So for example, agriculture, mining, human health, just to name a few. We connect companies with world-class researchers. We identify funding sources, and we develop high-potential Ontario-grown life sciences solutions to their issues. So with this business development pull model and working with Genome Canada, sometimes we're the first to invest in winning ideas. So we provide the early seed role of de-risking these ideas, supporting the innovation, supporting the idea that can be further developed in an innovative business environment. So I'd just like to give you a couple of examples of what I mean by the pull model. So an issue for the Ontario Beekeepers Association is the health of honeybees. And you may recall that honeybees fertilize approximately 75% of major global crops. So understanding their issue, and through a connection with an academic group, a collaborative project was developed to develop tools to breed disease-resistant bees. Now, this project was very small when it started, and it started with a small amount of seed funding from Ontario Genomics. But the success of this project, it went on to become a large-scale applied research project funded by Genome Canada and others to the value of over $7 million. In another example, the Ontario Hazelnut Association, we've been working with them to apply genomic solutions to overcome challenges that they're facing in producing hazelnuts in Ontario. So through collaboration with an academic group, we've identified some genomic-based projects which are being undertaken to increase the certainty of successful fertilization of hazelnuts. And this in turn ensures that we've got a stable crop of these nuts produced locally. And in a third example, we're working with a company that's developing environmental solutions for dealing with mine tailing wastes. And they've had a challenge in applying their phytostabilization technology in colder climates. So working with them and connecting them with academic collaborators, they've established a project where they're actually characterizing the microbial environments around plants that are growing in tailing tailing ponds in northern Ontario. So I could go on with a number of other solutions, but you can see the examples I've given have been outside of the health sector, and I just wanted to emphasize that the genomic solutions apply across a broad spectrum of activities. Our approach is to help identify genomic solutions, to build connections, to provide seed funding through our connections with Genome Canada, and to provide proof of concept and de-risking so that these ideas reach their end users, where they are receptive end users because we worked with them in the first place, and in that way generate tangible benefits.
Good. Thank you. I think the work that you do is a great example of how life sciences really spans so many disciplines these days. You know, who would have thought that Ontario Genomics would be focused on working with the mining industry?
Exactly.
So I think that's really kind of a revolutionary step forward. I think the other one is clearly your pull model, which you know isn't something extraordinary. That's what we should be doing, working with businesses to find out what their problems are and then helping find solutions. But it's something that you're doing that I think is really terrific. So that's great.
In retrospect, it makes sense, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Chirfi.
Yes, so it really is a pleasure here to share this panel with distinguished colleagues here. I have been in Canada in my role just over a year, so I beat you a little bit. So seriously though, in this past year I've been exposed to Ontario, to the science that's done in this province, in Canada more generally, but here we're speaking about Ontario specifically. And I could tell you that Ontario really is extremely competitive, the way we look at it as Merck, particularly in areas where we have a priority, areas that we have prioritized. Cardiometabolic diseases, for example, immuno-oncology, right? Vaccines, infectious diseases, and neurosciences. These are exactly the areas that we as Merck, from a corporate standpoint, have prioritized. And we have a number of collaborations in Ontario at the moment. We have venture capital collaborations with Lumira Capital, looking for ideas, obviously. We have research collaborations with this high density that has been talked about. One example that I would call out is the immuno-oncology area. Some of you may have seen the video that was broadcast last night on CBC National. Former President Jimmy Carter, who was diagnosed last August, I believe. He had metastatic melanoma, end stage, and he had his situation was so bad that he had the cancer had basically reached his brain. The liver had been impacted, so he was given basically a 10% chance of survival last August. So President Carter was put on treatment with immunotherapy with a drug called Keytruda. I'll tell you why that drug is important in a minute. And now he's completely clear. So the cancer's gone, and not only is he cleared of the cancer, but he is looking great. He is looking better than he's looked in years. So the lesson there is that this new area of immuno-oncology really promises to be extremely impactful for patients. And the reason why I'm mentioning this example is that the very early studies with Keytruda were actually done right here, Princess Margaret, 2011. So since we're talking about implementation, I thought this would be a great example of Merck, a big biopharmaceutical company, working with Ontario scientists, working with an institution, a world-renowned institution like Princess Margaret, to accelerate the development of Keytruda and make sure that patients like President Carter can have access to it. And today, in fact, there are many Jimmy Carters right here in Canada. They're not as famous, but they're there, they're also cleared, and they're looking great. So I'm really pleased to be here.
Yeah, good. I actually saw that piece on the National last night. Didn't realize it was your product. That's terrific. Good. Giles.
Well, I'm delighted to be here as well, and I know that you've had a great conversation today, a dialogue about the strategy that's needed to go forward, and Paul, you alluded to that in your remarks at the opening of the panel. And so I'm very excited to sort of hear more as this panel kind of responds to questions from the floor and what my colleagues have had to say. All will contribute, I think, to perhaps greater clarity about where we're going. I think, it's one of those, the story of life sciences in Ontario, I think, is some people see it as a glass half full, some people see it as a glass half empty, but it's probably fair to say that we're at a bit of an inflection point. We've come so far, and we have come so far. I think if you look at the last 10 years and the role that that the government has played in helping to nurture the sector, we can point to significant successes. It's often said that we're the third largest life sciences cluster in North America after Massachusetts and California. And granted, they are far above us. There's no question about that. But we are perhaps in the second tier. But that's not probably something we could have said 10 years ago. So we have moved up, and it's a good thing too, for reasons you've mentioned. This is the future economy of Ontario. If you look at the way the government has structured its support, it really is the entire continuum from a significant support for basic research through the Ontario Research Fund and the infrastructure component of that, right through to the support for the Ontario Institute for Cancer Research, Ontario Brain Institute, Ontario Genomics. So it's been an effort to try to push fundamental research, translational research, commercialization, right through the pipeline. The role that is played by Mars here in the life sciences sector in terms of commercialization, in terms of incubation of startups in the sector, in terms of finding capital support, that takes significantly supported by the province. So we've tried to kind of intervene at all the stages along that continuum. And I think if you look at the quantum that's been invested, it's been about 2.3 billion over the last 10 years. When you think about the Massachusetts Life Science Initiative, I think they pledged about $1 billion. So it's not that we're not spending money, we're spending lots of money. But as you pointed out, Paul, it's fairly fragmented landscape. Lots of different players, a lot of them trying to do the same thing, and that's not a bad thing. Competition's a good thing. But I think what you get from that maybe is a little less coherence than we probably need to move forward. A little better coherence among the different players, and that would include government. I know that in conversations with Minister Moridi about this that I've had, he feels the same thing, and I know he spoke to you this morning. He's asked me to see if we can continue the dialogue that started today, or not start today, but really I think that we had today. And so I think we're interested as a ministry in seeing if we can pull together a representative cluster of thought leaders within the sector, and along with government players, and seeing if we can, over the next while, bring a little more crystallization, a little more clarity to where we think collectively we want to go, and how perhaps the different players could be marshaled or harnessed to play to give it more impetus, to give us more impetus. We do want to reach the next level. I mean, it's interesting when you think about the dialogue. We did have the MedTech Roundtable several years ago, and if you think of what came out of that, it wasn't so much a strategy as some really great ideas that have helped move the sector forward. I mean, I can allude to Bill Charnetski here, who the idea for the Ontario Chief Health Innovation Strategist came from that. I mean, it was further developed by OHIC and by the OHIC report, but that was the germ of it that came out of that, as well as Excite. So you got some significant developments out of that roundtable. So I think we're interested in having another one around the life sciences sector to see if we can kind of move forward. There are some challenges. There's challenges in capital, and I think we've part of the continuum is the capital aspect, and we've obviously through the Ontario Fund of Funds, we've invested in significantly in life sciences companies, and so we expect to see more of that. And I guess the other piece is talent. Is one of the things we see across the innovation sector in Ontario, both ICT and life sciences, is we've got rich talent, but the pool is probably not as deep or as broad as it should be. And I think that's something that may hobble us as we move forward, unless we can see a way to expand it. Thank you.
Well, those are terrific comments, and I think we're very much aligned in our thinking and the meetings we've had with the minister as well. I think we've been talking about, how do we work together to take this sector to the next level, whatever that looks like. So I think we're very much on the same wavelength there. Thank you. Bill.
Perfect segue, right? Because I literally am an example of the government's commitment to pulling innovation through the healthcare system. This is day 70 or something of my job. I'm thrilled to have it. I'm still thrilled to have it. And there's a lot of reasons for that. In fact, Paul covered a number of them as to why I personally thought this was the right time to take on something like this. My mandate is to drive collaboration across the healthcare system, from healthcare providers through to innovators and entrepreneurs, to accelerate our adoption of new innovative health technologies. The cool part is there's two outcomes for that, or two objectives for that. One is to improve patient outcomes, so consistent with the ministry's strategy of patients first. But second, and the part that frankly fires me up, is the fact that we're also looking to create jobs in Ontario. So it's an economic development MRI initiative as well. And one of the great things about the vision and the role that was created is, in fact, it's not even just the two ministries that are involved. It's even the government and consumer services where you'll find procurement. So the vision of the government and the ministers involved to put together, to work together to put this role into the health organization and charge it with not just working around the ministry executive table, but to work outside in the healthcare system at large, I think sets it up for success. So you've heard from Paul, and you've talked today about the imperatives that come out of the need to grow this industry in the province. You've talked about the size of Toronto and Ontario, the wealth of talent, the quality of the research institutions, the quality of the universities, the fact we've got a city that people want to move to. It's now the fourth largest market in North America after Mexico City, New York City, and Los Angeles. It's a bigger market now than Chicago even. So the stuff you can't teach or buy is here. The economic imperative to grow the industry is here. You've got government support, and I think we're on the cusp of really trying to do something. But to talk about implementation for a second, as Paul said, I sit in some amazing meetings and have articulated what we call a bit of a working strategy, as I just said, but it's not going to matter a bit unless we can actually execute. So for those of you who've heard me talk before, and I've done a lot of talking in the last 70 days, but it's with purpose. We decided there's going to be three things I was going to focus on in the early part of the mandate on the execution point. One is articulate at least a working strategy, land on priorities, those are coming, and figure out how we're going to measure results, because we're here to have an impact. If all I've done, and if we look at this 2 years from now, and all that's happened is I've been a busybody who's creating meetings and activity for already ferociously busy people, I've messed up. So I'm not going to do that. We'll have a short list of priorities. We have a long list of potential priorities. But as you've heard, no doubt, if everything's a priority, nothing is. So we're not going to do that. We're going to have a shorter list, and we're going to measure ourselves on using outcomes that are results oriented, not just measuring the number of meetings, the number of speeches, the number of panels, that kind of stuff. So that's kind of the first bucket. The second bucket is classic organizational development. I walked into an empty office, literally, no furniture, no people. I had the huge benefit of the OHIC report. So it wasn't that I was walking into or onto a green field, and that was massive. And full support of the people around me, so that was also important. But we literally, once I had a working strategy in place, had to ensure we created a structure that facilitated the execution of the strategy, started to hire people, and know where we could tap resources. So we've actually got the right people with the right skills and capabilities to execute that strategy we've talked about, and then processes. It's government, right? So there are things that I knew I couldn't change, and I didn't bang my head against those walls in the first 70 days, but there's things that we're going to do that will ensure that we're working efficiently and ultimately effectively, again, to execute that strategy. The third bucket of work is what you have seen many. It's cool. I actually recognize a lot of people in the crowd. I'm making progress. But with purpose, I have been out of the office every day but 3. There are only 3 days in the first 70 where I have been only in the office, and it's been done with purpose. You all expect me to have built relationships with my ministry executive colleagues. As the OHIC stated quite clearly, someone needs to be on the other end of the phone when people who are small and medium-sized entrepreneurs in Ontario have bright ideas and want to commercialize them in the province. So that's going to be us. And those priorities I talked about, it will not do a stitch of good if those priorities just come out of the top of my head thinking, hey, let's work on these 3 things, if they don't align with the priorities of the health ministry. And I'm really confident they're going to, because the list of my priorities, potential priorities, is so long, I already know we'll match up with ministry priorities. So that increases the chance of success. But also, equally importantly, I have control over virtually no one. I'm a firm believer that you get a lot done if you don't care who gets credit. And that's a good thing, because we will succeed or fail based on the quality of our relationships, the fact that we've done things like aligned priorities, the fact that we've built some trust with people who can pull through technology, and ultimately whether we're collaborating with them on things that are important to everybody involved. If we do those 3 things, we're off to a pretty good start on execution. And we will focus on execution, because it's, I've spent time in government, I've spent time at a top-tier law firm, I've been an executive in Canada and executive globally. And, you learn pretty quickly that if you aren't focused on execution, nothing is going to happen, and I just refuse to let that happen. So I am really excited. We're going to create an innovation ecosystem, all of us working together. You've talked about that today. There will be a tipping point. There will be a point at which we've had enough great things pulled through. Other people around the province have seen what great ideas there are in the province and how they can be commercialized. And all those things that I said you can't buy or teach that you all know are here, I'm convinced will culminate in something pretty special in the GTA in Ontario in our field.
Thank you, Bill. We're very pleased that you're in this new role, and I know if Rafi Hofstein and Neil Fraser were here, who are members of our board and advisory board, they are thrilled as well. So obviously addressing that key issue that many of us have been talking about for a number of years around the procurement issue. So welcome and good luck. Yeah. Tom.
Thanks, Paul, and thank you very much for the invitation to be here today. Just a few comments perhaps on what we need to do to create a made in Ontario, globally competitive biotech sector from OCE's perspective. So I think a few things are given. We have a very highly skilled workforce in the province. I don't think anybody would argue with that. Perhaps the depth isn't there in some areas, as Giles mentioned, but nevertheless, in general, we do have a very highly skilled workforce. Our scientists and researchers are amongst the top in the world, without any question. We have very strong and supportive funding programs through the province and federal tax policies as it relates to R&D. We have a pretty well-developed commercialization network in the form of organizations such as Mars Innovation and the Ontario Network of Entrepreneurs. But we have challenges, and some significant challenges, when it comes to commercialization in many sectors in the province, not only in the biotech sector. Many of our early-stage companies find it easier to find their first customers south of the border, especially in the life sciences space. Specifically, in our healthcare sector, it can be very challenging for new companies to sell their products into the health sector in Ontario. And there's ways to address these. And I'd like to give you one example of what's being done in a program that we've had the privilege of running for the last couple of years called Advancing Health, which is a good example, I think, of how we're trying to address some of these issues. So what does Advancing Health do? Well, it supports demonstration projects in hospitals for startup companies and early-stage companies in Ontario, where the hospitals will agree to take on a demonstration program for a particular product, and if it works, then the rest of them will agree at least to look at it throughout the entire system as potentially acquiring the product over a period of time. So through the Advancing Health program, OCE pays for half the cost of the demonstration program in a hospital setting, typically, which can take up to a year, and it's up to the hospital and the company to pay the other half of the cost. In addition to this, we've got a lot going on in terms of supporting incubators that are very active in the health sector and the bio sector. And some of them, which are dedicated, in fact, to these sectors, are incubators like Helix and BioLink. And we're also partnering with our friends in Quebec at CQDM, along with Life Sciences Ontario, to fund pharma research in both provinces, which is being very well received, and there's a huge demand for that program. So I think what we need to focus in on now is we've got lots going on and lots of activity, lots of organizations involved with it. I think between Bill and Giles, some rationalization is probably going to be needed going forward in terms of who should be doing what, and we can build on our strengths in Ontario. So just as a starting point, that's sort of my view coming out of the chute.
Great, thank you, Tom. And you mentioned the Ontario-Quebec corridor, which has been an interesting concept, which hopefully we can continue to advance, because if we can make that broader corridor even stronger, we can attract more investment here. So that's great. Okay, I'm going to open it up for questions for you. We have a great panel here, and these are people that you don't get a chance to interact with every day. So can I open it up for any questions? Anybody have a question? You got one over here? I see the mic moving, but I don't see who's got the question.
Hi, thanks for all of your comments on the panel today. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the role of our new government, the Liberal majority government, that, leading up to the election, they talked about a platform of supporting innovation through investing into IRAP and into incubators, a $900 million plan. Those are two areas that I think we've discussed more about incubators and not so much about IRAP. What are your thoughts? I mean, what are you hearing from the new government as to where they're possibly going to focus in terms of innovation, science, and where they're going to put their money?
Deputy, would you like to answer that?
I'll give a shot.
Okay.
It's a very good question, and I mean, in a way, you almost echo our thoughts. It's very early days in the new federal government, and I know Minister Moridi had a quick meeting with the new science minister, I think on Monday, last Monday, but it was very brief. It was really more getting meet and greet, as they say. And I don't think it was really an opportunity for sort of significant discussion. These, so much has been happening. It was a very fast cabinet. I mean, they created the cabinet pretty quickly. And I think many of the offices are still largely unstaffed or have very small skeleton staffs. And so it's probably too soon to even hazard much of a response, apart from saying that we are very interested we're giving our counterparts at the officials levels a little bit of room to be briefing up their ministers, and then we'll be on them probably early in the new year. We certainly have strong ideas about how they can support us. One of the things, obviously, in this area of life sciences, but it's probably true of science in general, I think there's a sense that over the last decade or so, the federal government hasn't pulled back, but it's the amount of resources that's expended in the sector has not certainly grown, I think, commensurate with what the Ontario government has done. And so I think we're looking for the federal government to step up somewhat, and I think certainly the campaign commitments, not so much in the throne speech, but you can't have everything in a 50-minute speech. But there is certainly a sense, and with I think the appointment of a science minister, that we expect them to be stepping up, and I think we regard that as a significant buttressing potentially of our activity here. So that's what makes it a propitious moment, because I think we're doing a fair bit, but we're a provincial government, can't carry it alone. We've got a deficit, and so we are looking for that kind of support.
Okay, good. Tom?
We've been fortunate over the last few years to work very closely with NSERC, IRAP, FedDev, Business Development Bank, to the extent where one can now, as a company, go onto our website, apply for a OCE program, and literally at the click of the button can apply for funding from all those organizations with the same application form at the same time, and review the applications together and get a decision relatively quick. So that's been a long time in the making. The reason I'm giving you that by way of background, we deal with these people literally on a daily basis, and all the signals we're getting, for what it's worth, is very positive, that they see more partnering opportunities, more funding coming their way, and so we're very optimistic based on what we hear. But as Giles said, some of the infrastructure and the people aren't even in place at some of the ministries yet. So we'll see when the rubber meets the road exactly how it rolls out. But we're quite optimistic based on what we're hearing from our partners that it's all good news going forward.
Good. Any other thoughts? Okay. Others? Yeah, there's one down here.
Thank you. My name's Tyler Whale. I represent Ontario Agri-Food Technologies. We've heard a lot about investment in pharma with the pH, as Don said, and I think one of the challenges in agriculture as the bioeconomy develops is the investment in the pilot scale-up. So VC-ready investment versus valley of death, bench to commercialization, all of the issues in between, but the pilot part of the bioeconomy, and this is making chemicals like bioambers, base-succinic acid, or even drugs, a company we all know probably is Plantform, is in that $10 to $40 million range, but it's not VC ready. What do you guys think on what can be done to help that, again, bench to commercialization in that agriculture-based bioeconomy sector that isn't even close to VC ready, but at the same time takes huge dollars?
Yeah, I don't have an easy answer for you. We know your company, we're involved with it, and as we are with a lot of others in that sector, and especially in the ag space. And we're currently rolling out a program which we call our Voucher for Innovation, where agricultural companies come together, identify needs that they would like to see funded as a group, as a sector, and we fund that and move forward with it to help the whole sector. And we've done that besides agriculture and mining and aerospace and so on. But it's a challenge because there are some sectors where the little money that we provide, which is a lot of money in aggregate, but not a lot to a single company, simply doesn't get you to the de-risking stage where it's of interest to venture capitalists. And the ag sector and the bio and farmers are prime examples where it just takes a lot more money to get there than IT does, for example.
Oh, the only thing I would say, I mean, I would agree with what Tom says. One of the things that I can say is that at MEDEI, we are focusing on about 4 sectors that we want to kind of build into clusters, into more coherent clusters. And really almost as I'm not going to say an experiment, but certainly we want to sort of see whether there's an idea that's out there called Brain Belts, and it's really kind of open platform, collaborative sort of research and technology development, if you will, from a cluster. So that would be the large firms. So we're glad we got BioAmber there. Smaller firms, university research, colleges, how you can pull the whole group together to foster a more lively cluster, more successful cluster. So one of the ones we've chosen is biochemical, and recognizing, and one of the other ones we've chosen is auto. So at the other end of the scale, one sector that's going to go through massive change, which is the auto sector, and it's got to be much more technology driven if it's going to succeed in the province over the next decade. And another which has got huge promise, but as you've described it, is still struggling in many parts of it. I mean, we think that one of the keys to that sector is the anchor. So obviously BioAmber's presence and potentially larger presence is really important to building out the sector with a strong anchor. But we know we need more, and we want to focus on it in a deliberate way.
So I just want to stay on this issue of capital and investment for a minute, because as I look at the panel, all of you actually have capital that you invest in companies, in startup companies, except Bill, I guess. At least for now. Yeah, a little bit. Right.
He gets some customers so that they can.
Right, yes, yeah. So at Ontario Genomics, I mean, you have your investment program there. You've funded a number of startup companies. I mean, in the pharma sector, you know, you're providing significant investments to startups. Of course, the government piece as well, Deputy. Yeah, and Tom, you're doing the same thing. So, you know, this is the number one issue that we get feedback on, as everybody knows. So we've got a number of pieces. You know, where do you think the holes are? And what do you think of, I'm just going back to the federal government, I mean, what do you think of the idea, and I see my friend over here, David Allen, you should have asked this question, David. I saw you out of the corner of my eye, is the whole issue of tax policy change, which would actually generate significant investment in the sector, like flow-through shares or capital gains exemptions for startups, similar to what's been done in the mining, oil, and gas sector. Maybe I can get each of your thoughts on that.
I mean, as Merck, you mentioned it, Paul, we have, you know, we participate in the venture in Lemira Capital. We have another one called Amorcam, which is Quebec-based, but they do pan-Canadian as well. Actually, Lemira Capital is represented here by their executive team, so if anybody's interested, I encourage you to go and talk to them. No, I think for us, really, aside from the good science, you know, good science is always what the starting point. But we also look at, you know, market. You know, I'd like to give an example, and that is one that, you know, I'm very passionate about because there's a lot of good science being done in this field of antibiotics. Antimicrobial resistance, as it's known, it is a major problem, right? In Canada, in fact, according to Public Health Agency of Canada, there are about 18,000 Canadians who are infected with resistant bacteria every year, and thousands die because they don't get the antibiotics that work for them, and they don't get them quickly enough in the setting in which they're treated. So there are a number of startups, actually, that come up with ideas, come up with candidate products in this field of antimicrobials. But guess what? So when you look at the attractiveness of this field, it is increasingly a problem now because the incentive system is just not helping these companies to be attractive. What I mean by that is if you develop a good drug, a good antibacterial, you bring it to market. What happens in Canada today, typically that product will be put on the shelf. It's not going to be used because people are afraid to use the so-called big gun. So they tend to wait until it's too late. And so if you look at the cash flow coming out of a product like that, it is not very attractive. So you have very low uptake curves in terms of revenue stream. And you also have a very small total area under the curve because the patent life is still fixed. So it takes a long time to get any revenue, and then you don't have a lot of time to maximize your revenue opportunity. We feel it as a big biopharmaceutical company because we do have a portfolio of antibacterials, but I think it's even more critical for the small companies that are starting to emerge and looking for capital. In fact, we have seen a number coming our way. We've had to turn some down, back and say, we have competing products, or more often, the market opportunity is simply not there. So I'd be very interested to have a dialogue with, with government, with other payers, regulators, to look at ways to really revisit the whole incentive scheme. Think about a model, for instance, where you would pay a company for not using their drug. That's something that I'd love to have dialogue about.
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, Chirfi's comments are I think, they sort of, point to some of the underlying complexities of almost peculiar to the life sciences sector when it comes to financing. I mean, at MRI, we actually look at the ICT sector, we look at life sciences. Those are two big sectors for us, and it's quite arresting to see the very different needs of the life sciences sector and the timelines that that a life sciences company requires to prove out the product and to develop any kind of market for itself, and therefore to attract capital and and all of the regulatory requirements and so on. So it's a very different world, and one of the things we know is that Ontario has not exactly been blessed with abundance of venture capital over the years. I mean, I think we peaked out in 2000 with the dot-com boom and then the bust that followed. The government has put a fair bit in. I mean, obviously OVCF, Ontario Venture Capital Fund, which is a fund of funds, has invested in a number of funds. About 30%, I guess, of OVCF funding goes to life sciences companies, and then you've got the Northleaf Fund that just began less than a year ago, and it's invested in at least one pure life sciences fund, and an Gherson Ventures fund, for example. So we're doing what we can to stimulate the venture capital market for life sciences. But I think we think it's just not going far fast enough. And then it comes to the question of, well, how do you unlock the wealth that's here in Ontario and in Toronto? We know it's here, but we're having great difficulty sort of pulling it into our startups, whether it be ICT or life sciences. So I think then you do start thinking about, as you are, Paul, and as others are there is there a tax regime or a tax credits approach mechanism that would be more effective than what we have? I mean, the flow-through share approach is one that's been studied, 6 ways to Sunday. Doesn't mean it's wrong, but one of the questions would be, it would really be much more applicable to life sciences than to ICT, for example. We're looking at a whole range with the Ministry of Finance now, with a whole range of options, partly because, going to the last questioner, the federal government is starting to evince some interest in maybe looking at different approaches to stimulating investment in startups, whether they be life sciences or ICT. And for us, it would be a lot easier to follow the feds. The corporate tax system fundamentally is modeled off of the federal system. They collect corporate tax for the province. And so if you start changing the tax code too much, the federal government will say, we're not going to collect for you, and there's all kinds of issues. So it would be a lot easier for us if we could work together with the federal government. We propose to do that.
Okay, good. And we'd be happy to work with you on that one.
Terrific.
Bill?
So I'm gonna round the conversation off a little bit, building on some of this, because so I've been in London, England for about 3 years. I've been back for a year now, and one of the things I noticed when I came back, and actually people who know more about this than me said the same thing, there's more money available now than there was 5 years ago. And so you kind of can quickly go to, well, if it's a really good idea, it will get funding in Canada. And it will be a better idea if we have an ecosystem in place that actually pulls through those good ideas in Ontario. And that's, if we have two big priorities, one is pathways to the adoption and diffusion of this new innovative health technology, and the second is moving our health systems procurement basis to a strategic procurement model, value-based procurement. Which, for example, is now tried and true in Europe as a result of a mandate from the European Union government to use value-based procurement. So 2 components, cost and value. There's a lot of work to be done in quantifying what the value piece is, but it's more than just grinding people down to the lowest cost in a short-term assessment. And on the pathway to the adoption and diffusion point, if you have a great idea in Ontario right now, you may be advised that it's not even worth your while to worry about getting your first customer in the Ontario healthcare system. They may even advise you that really you're best off to just uproot and head to Ohio or New Jersey or California to be closer to that customer base, which is more mobile, driven by different motivations, there are different incentives, And we have companies here with great technology that are not procured in Ontario, that are procured in the US and many countries around the world. If we could unlock, to use your phrase, unlock that potential in our ecosystem, then, I mean, money will follow that. And if, in fact, an investor can, you go to a potential investor and you get to tell a story to the investor that says, you know what, here's what's going to happen in Ontario. I'm going to get input early on into what evidence somebody's going to ask me about down the piece. And then I'm going to know what evidence I generate to answer that question about, third piece, probably some form of value assessment or health technology assessment, but not like in pharma, something that is very sensitive to the fact that in devices, for example, it's a completely different business model. There's shorter time frames, they're smaller companies often, they're not able to manage the ebbs and flows of decisions that come from HTA assessors, and they're also, they'll have evidence packages from elsewhere, and given the nature of the technology, they may not even be intrusive to the body, and they may not even require full evidence base. So you know up front what evidence might be required, you can generate that evidence. Now you've got an assessment as to whether there's value that's very sensitive, value to the system, that's very sensitive to your business case. And then you've got a procurement model that will pull that through. If that's all in place, then there will be more money available because the ideas will be perceived as generating more value potentially. I hope I'm right.
I think you are. I think in our case, the lessons we've learned over the years is, first of all, because we're investing small amounts, up to $500,000 max, which for a medical device is probably not unreasonable to get it kicked off. But the mantra at OCE, for many of you who may have dealt with us over the years, is that we don't put out a penny unless we get a penny of match from industry. So be that industry match from a venture capitalist or another company that wants to co-invest in the IP, there has to be pull. And the ultimate sign of pullage, if you will, for lack of a better word, is somebody that's willing to co-invest, that's in the business, and match the dollars that we put in. So that's the test that we use in terms of pull. And it works pretty good in the medical devices area. And as we talked about a bit earlier, the partnerships that we have with people like LSO, with CQDM, Bioscience Quebec, and developing devices. And with CQDM, it's platforms to help in the drug discovery process. That model works just fine. Once you get beyond that, and we've had a recent story which is very near and dear to my heart, we funded a company which was very much into high-performance computing software for drug development. We provided them with considerable funding. They used the province's high-performance computing platform through the SOCIP program. They went to raise $4 million, and they just didn't have a hope here in Canada. So they did get lots of offers. In fact, there was a bidding war going on out of California for them. But the conditions of virtually all these investors was you had to move to California if you want to take our money. So they took the money, and now they're gone. And we want to avoid that at all costs if we can. You'll never avoid it completely because somebody somewhere in another jurisdiction is probably going to make an offer that you can't always compete with. And maybe somebody just prefers to live in California. I don't know. But nevertheless, those are the kind of challenges that are really bothersome for us as an organization, a lot less than in the medical devices area where I think we can do a pretty good job of managing that kind of deal flow.
Good, thank you.
And Paul, maybe just one other thing that I guess no one's mentioned yet is the role that exports play in all this. So Ontario's market, of course, is roughly the size of California-ish. The notion of that first customer being here, so when you're an Ontario company looking to market in a different jurisdiction, and they ask what's happening in the home jurisdiction, you've got the evidence.
Absolutely.
That is where you will get the growth that'll take you to a size, potentially, of some of the companies you're talking about.
Questions? Yep, right here, Peter.
So I want to actually pick up on exactly that comment, and maybe this is comment for you, Bill, or for Gilles. So Mackenzie Health announced a $300 million procurement, 18-year contract, sole source to Philips recently. If that had been a federal contract for a defense procurement, it would have included probably a 10% offset for local procurement.
Yeah.
Why wasn't that part of the thought process on that? That just seems like the perfect fit for exactly what you're talking about.
It should be. It should be, right? And You know, the reality is it's day 70. But I hope that, no, so I hope that in the future we've got our arms around that. And I know there are initiatives right now, like at GCS they're looking at it. There's now, you would have seen last week there was a supply chain review initiative announced that it's a combination of health and government and consumer services looking at how to get at that issue. There are other initiatives trying to crack that nut, but it has to be. Other jurisdictions do that, and we're going to try.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is becoming a huge priority. It's been around for a long time, and I was in Cabinet Office a number of years ago, and the issue came up, and we pushed pretty hard, and we were pretty clear about some of the differences between the way we did procurement and the way, say, California did it. And we've always got this kind of Boy Scout mentality, I think, around trade rules and so on. My feeling is, the more I look at it, the more I think it's a lack of strategy, in the sense that if you don't, there's lots of ways to plan a procurement over time to ensure that your smaller players in your ecosystem are aware of what might be coming down the pike and sort of get ready for it, as opposed to, here's the RPF, geez, you can't compete with Cisco, that's too bad. I don't think we actually think it through well enough. So we've actually been giving a fair bit of thought to it. It's one of the main pillars of, we've got this Ed Clark exercise going on now, which is really about, growing the innovation dimension to the economy, and one of them is procurement. And so obviously when Bill came on, that was part of, as on the MRI side, something that we were very much part of, but we actually would like to extend it into Bill's kind of role, maybe a similar role for the more general procurement piece for the government in the Ministry of Government and Consumer Services, because it absolutely is crucial, and I mean, we're just very excited to see how Bill moves forward, because I think it's a kind of a lighthouse example of how we can do procurement right.
Well, look, it's hard to believe, but we're out of time. I want to thank you all, gentlemen, for being here today and helping us with our thinking around moving a strategy forward, and look forward to speaking with you some more about this. And we'll look forward to what comes out in our report and our wrap-up a little bit further down the line, and we'll obviously keep you informed and keep you engaged. So thank you very much.